Hello everybody, we're going to work tonight on Unit 4. I just enabled this unit inside of Blackboard, and this is moving us into a kind of a different paradigm basically in Java programming. So far we've been learning the precepts of GUI programming. We did 3 chapters, 14, 15, and 16, and we learned how to work with a bunch of different things. And now in order to kind of like ramp up our application development to the next level, we're going to learn how to work with databases inside of Java. And this is a big step. You know, it's not that difficult necessarily to connect to a database, but understanding how it all works and then converting that all into code and then having your code actually do something with the database is really important. I will tell you right up front that our book, depending on which edition you're looking at, we are actually stepping outside the book, so to speak, the physical printed book. And if you have the 11th edition, and that's the one I think that has a tan cover on it, for that version of the textbook, this is a bonus web chapter. And the place where you get that from is by using that code inside the cover of your book, going to the author's supplemental site, downloading the chapter. However, I do want to let you know that I also kind of did you guys the courtesy of pre-downloading all that stuff and putting them right here. So you see I have all the bonus web chapters in the resources area of our website. And so that's what you want to pull down. I'm just going to go ahead and grab it right away since I know that we're going to need it. So I'm going to be kind of running it through the browser today. And if I get really frustrated with that, I'll switch over to the PDF version and use the actual Adobe Reader. We'll see. But I do want to point out here a couple of things on the resources page. And I know we started talking about this last week. The one thing I do want to point out is as our code gets complex, and it's kind of from this point on in the chapter that sometimes, you know, it takes me quite a while to actually like type in a bunch of code and have you guys copy it just to do an example. So what I might end up doing is using this code share link that I have right here at the top of the resources section. I thought we kind of looked at that last week in here. Yeah. So that's a spot where we can go just to kind of like live share code. The other thing inside here is the fact that not only do I have all the 11th edition book resources, including all the bonus chapters, I also want to point out, you know, like somebody was just asking, where do you get the audio file? Well, guess what, folks? It's right here. There's also all the even number exercises. So this is how I know if you guys even looked at it. Like when you guys get an even number exercise and you're looking for the solution, they're all right here in the zip file. See where my pointer is right now? Okay, the solutions are there. I always want you to try to work through them first before you start copying code. And I'll tell you what, sometimes even when you copy code, it doesn't work. So it's not always a blessing to get the code handed to you. All right, so I think that's just stuff you should know. There's also links to the companion website and the 11th edition supplements. You do need a login code for it. I think mine are expired right now, so I should probably kind of try to renew it. There's a listing here of what the topics are from all the chapters. There's also a listing of the errata. Now, I haven't updated this in a while, so notice I haven't checked it since March of 2017. Now, the place that you might go to double check it is the supplemental website again. But these are known errors in the book. You notice that it hits on none of the chapters that we've covered so far. Yeah. Right, so not a big deal. For those of you that happen to have an old copy of the textbook, which is practically identical to the 11th edition, I have all the 10th edition resources that, you know, I just, you know, when I copy and paste my course shells, you know, I'm like, you know what, I'll just leave them all there because somebody could pick up the 10th edition and still take this class. So you don't have to necessarily go out and drop like $200 on a book, but I'm assuming that most of you did. But either way, it's a good book. It's got a lot of information in it, so don't feel bad. Some useful links here. And the other thing that we might run into starting tonight is the fact that some of you might need to use a VPN connection to connect to some of the resources we need in order to do your work when you are off campus or connected to the guest network here. We'll cover that one at a time. Just want to show you where the instructions are before we begin. All right, so back over to Unit 4. So Unit 4 covers Chapter 34, the bonus web chapter, which we saw where to get it from. If you're using the old book, it's chapter 32. So when you look at some of the videos I have on the page here, I still refer back to chapter 32 in my archive videos. And you know, I thought I did a really nice job with those videos, even though they're pretty dated. So I am in the process right now of uploading these to YouTube, and then I'm going to link them up. Right now, as I hover over each link, I see that it points back to Gateway's old video server, which is no longer active. But like I said, I'm going to correct that. I figure that even if it's dated, it's still got good stuff in it. And then you'll also notice that some of the exercise videos that I record, you know, in the last batch of recording, I caught 34.3 and 34.5, and 34.1 is actually down here in the archive videos. And so that's actually kind of why I'm recording this new video, partially because I want to start maybe updating and modernizing them a little bit. Also because the last time I recorded this, we were working with Kronos as our web server, and there are some slight differences in how you land inside of Kronos, particularly in the file structure, from when you're uploading your SQL files to load them into the database, and then also connecting to the database is ever so slightly different on Apollo, so I felt compelled to record. All right, I'm actually going to begin by doing something I haven't done in this class a lot since the beginning, and that is actually lecturing a little bit. But I want to kind of do a show of hands real quick. How many of you have already taken the databases class in the web program? Either databases or advanced databases. Okay, I got one. You're in progress? Oh, gotcha. Okay, yeah. Say no more. Understood. You know, that's fine. Just so you know, we are offering that class in the spring, and it is a required class in the program, and it's a pretty important one. My goal here is not to teach you how to be a database programmer. However, the skills you learn in that class, particularly fashioning SQL statements, is pretty important for getting the homework done. Okay, so the fortunate thing is they're not real high-level SQL commands. Most of them are just like doing reading the information, maybe doing an insert or an update. You're not like writing like foreign keys and inner joins and things like that, so you don't have to freak out too much. But it is a springtime class, and it will be offered. And just so you guys know, I am teaching a section of it this spring, so you could always sign up for my section. That'll be offered out at IMET in the spring, so you don't even have to travel all the way down to the lake to come and take the class if you're coming in from out of town. I'm just mentioning it. All right, let's go ahead and pull a PDF up here, and I'm going to start slowly going through the chapter. So the reason I do a little bit of pre-lecture on this is exactly for what I just discovered, which is I get a mix of students. So for example, a lot of our students do not go full-time, right? And I don't know what your guys' scenario is. So if you were a full-time student, Java 2 happens at the same time as the database class, and you know what? By the time you get to this point in the semester, you have enough SQL under your belt where you can start doing this stuff. So we figure it's okay. However, if you're going part-time and you're kind of picking and choosing your classes, you may be taking this class before you have databases, in which case that can be a little problematic. So I'm giving you a little bit of database information so you understand how this works. All right. So this chapter, excuse me, has this as the objective, so you can kind of read through that a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of database, what it means, how it works, what SQL is, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of getting it to work inside of a Java programming environment, and that is basically by using what we call the JDBC, which is the connection piece that allows the software we create to talk to a database. All right? And then we'll have it actually do stuff, which is kind of interesting. All right. Now this is you know, a step-by-step here. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is Java as a programming language, like most good programming languages, usually provide what we call APIs, or application programming interfaces, that allow us to interact directly with various database types. So in other words, there's a plugin that you're going to add to the language that allows that connection and also allows you to then interact with the database and then pull data from the database or write data to the database and use it in your application. If you're not aware of this, I always think when you learn how to program, you kind of like, you're usually creating programs that just sit on your own machine, nobody usually sees them. But when you start connecting databases to your software, that's when they really become like real software, because most real software packages have a database at their core somehow, reading and writing information. And so it's kind of a big threshold for you guys in my mind that you're going to cross into like becoming real application developers now, because your databases are connecting. So I think that's kind of a cool moment. Let's talk about what databases are. And you see here in this section they're talking about relational database systems. And they have this little graphic, and I think this is kind of, it's a little simplistic, but it gets the point across. And the point is basically this. When you have somebody sitting down in an application, a user, they're interfacing with a program. That program may or may not, but in our case, in this chapter, will be interfacing with some sort of database management system, and then that system ultimately interfaces with the database itself. So there's really kind of a separation here. So the first part is the code we write is our program. That's the program, the second box there. The database management system is the piece of software on some server somewhere. It might be your local machine, it might be some remote server, that runs the actual database. But the database is the collection of information that actually sits on the server, and it is independent of the software that runs it. So in other words, that store of information can actually be interacted with various database management systems. And that's kind of a key takeaway. If you take the database class, hopefully you learn that. And I know in the database class that the primary environment that you're working with is a product called SQL Server. And then when you fire up your SQL Server Management Studio, that's the database management system. The database is the data, not the database management system. So you see the difference? Yep. Okay. All right, so what is actually a database? Well, it's really kind of a collection of information. And there's a lot of popular systems out there, and they start listing some of the more popular database management systems. The one that we're going to be using in this class to do most of our work is a database management system called MySQL. So MySQL is a piece of software that we have loaded up on Apollo that allows us to interact with the database on Apollo. And the other big notable systems out there, so for example, Oracle. Okay, Oracle, now keep in mind we're learning Java. Java is an Oracle product, right? It originally was developed by Sun Microsystems. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but Sun Microsystems originally developed Java, and of course Sun Microsystems got bought out by Oracle, and Oracle, their big product was their database, and it still is, and it's one of the biggest enterprise level databases out there. A lot of corporations run their operations on Oracle databases. Now, interestingly, MySQL is also an Oracle product. Isn't that interesting, right? It's still an open source product. It's still free to use. It has almost all the same capabilities as the whole Oracle database system. And because of the free part, it is probably the world's most popular database system, and it powers a majority of most websites out there. And that's why it's really important to learn. The neat thing about it is the SQL statements that you learn that interface with these databases will apply to all the database management systems that we see listed here on this page. So we have MySQL, we have Oracle. If you were in our software program here, we teach IBM DB2, so that's the one that runs on IBM mainframe or mid-range systems. So that's a big database system. There's also Informix, that's another big one from IBM. Then of course we got Microsoft's product, which is another one that's way at the top of the heap in terms of use, and that one's called SQL Server. SQL Server used to have, and perhaps they still do, an Express version that a lot of times web developers would use for .NET applications. But the unique thing about the SQL Server, yeah, not anymore. That's kind of what I was thinking. But SQL Server does require it to run on Windows systems. All the others are capable of running on multiple platforms, but usually prefer to be run on top of Linux or Unix systems for a number of different reasons. All right, so once again, the one that we are going to be using is going to be MySQL. And another thing that you're going to notice is that all of these systems, in one way, shape, form, or another, have some sort of a graphical tool that you can use to manipulate the database, and we'll see that a little bit later tonight. Some of them, in fact, actually a majority of them, also allow for the traditional approach of database programming, which is the way I learned way back, several decades back, which is through a command line interface. Okay, so that's kind of fascinating. And so any of the commands that you may have been learning or are currently learning in your database class, where you type like a select, from, where, etc., those statements can be operated from a command line and execute just the same as they would inside like the graphical piece of software. All right, so I'll show you a couple pieces of software you can use, and I think that's kind of interesting. Another thing that's kind of fascinating is that sometimes when we write applications, it is possible for our application to actually interface with multiple databases simultaneously. And that's not something you might think that you would normally do, but if you think about an application, why does it necessarily just have to interface with one database? If you were doing like an e-commerce application, it could be that one part of the application was interfacing with an inventory database that is distinct from a sales transaction database. And they're on different machines. And not only that, but even individual database management systems can also have pools of databases that they're working with. And as you get into the enterprise level of application development, that is often the case. Because sometimes the databases get so big and robust that they can't do all of it on one machine. And there's like logical reasons to separate them too. But that always is kind of an organizational issue. All right. When we talk about databases, you often hear this term about what we call relational database systems. And this next section here talks about the relational aspect of data. But the bottom line is that all databases are built upon a spreadsheet-like structure called a table. In some systems, they'll call them a file, so just so you know that, but they're basically the same thing. A table is a construct that consists of rows and columns. Typically, we think of them as columns relating to individual attributes of a single entity. So, for example, in this case, they're looking at a course table that might be in some sort of an educational database, maybe like here at Gateway, where we have a course ID, a subject ID, a course number, a title, and the number of credits for each course. The first row here is the identifiers for each one of the columns. Then, on a row-by-row basis, we have related information to one record. So we would call this one record in the database that pertains to one single entity of some sort of logical construct, in this case, a course. Okay? So we can have a whole bunch of information in here. We can have maybe very little information, but it is all information that is of a certain type to go into each column. So that's another thing that happens in database design, is when we start to get information built up. So for example, course ID looks like it's strictly numeric, where subject ID looks like it's alphabetic. Course number is numeric again. The title seems like it's maybe a combination of both. Number of credits is also numeric. And so the database itself kind of expects that certain types of information go into each column. The beautiful thing is, as a web programmer or application developer, you don't, often take the role or wear the hat of being the database administrator. And often when you're building an application, you're given access to a database in certain parts of it, and all you're really doing is maybe just reading information from it. In some cases, you might also be writing information to it. Okay, so those are kind of important things to know. The thing that makes it relational is when you start to add multiple tables of information. So a database really, in essence, is not just like one single spreadsheet file. Although, I will tell you, it might be. Some databases contain only one table because they're really simple. But a proper relational database will actually have separate tables for different types of information. So up above we saw a course table, and now they're showing us a student table. So in an educational environment like ours here at Gateway, we probably have databases that hold information like this. And you can see if you look in here, this is information about each individual student. It has their social security number, first name, middle initial, last name, phone, birth date, street, zip code, department ID, which might indicate what their degree path is, just for example. So it's like information that's personal to each individual student. So one row of information here always pertains to that one student. All right? And this is kind of fascinating too. Like when I started going to school way back when, and yeah, they did have computers back then, although they were clunky, our student ID numbers were almost always, guess what? Our social security numbers. And they even printed it on our report cards and all our documents, right? Yeah, we see the problem with that now. But you have to remember, when they were doing that back then, hardly anybody had a computer or internet access, so it wasn't really an issue. In fact, when the internet first came out, you could actually go to the IRS website and put in somebody's social security number and get their whole wage history. It was open records. How do you like that? Yeah, they've locked that down now. But that was kind of a problem, because that's like one step to stealing a person's identity, right? Okay, so most schools, they will still record the social security number, but that's not their student ID number anymore. And then the other thing that they do in tables like this is you'll also find that some of the records or some of the fields in here must be unique. So for example, two people can't have the same social security number, right? How would the government keep track of them or get their taxes? So, and then some fields it might not matter. So for example, I have several people with the same last name. It's Smith, right? And then sometimes, and this happens a lot, if you have like a really common name, you might be in a school where there's another Jacob R. Smith. Heck, it's even possible you have the same birth date, right? But your social security number will always be unique. And what a lot of database programmers often do is when they do database design, is they usually also create for every table what they call an ID field, not to give like a person a student ID, but just to keep a separate individual record of each entry in the database. It's just considered good database design. Now the thing that's fascinating here, right, notice that subject ID, right, might match up with department ID in this table. So like if somebody's enrolled in math, kind of there's like a kind of a relationship to perhaps this. Yeah, there's a kind of a correlation there. And so that's a relationship between the two tables. If you take it further, if somebody goes ahead and enrolls in a course, they might have an enrollment table. And instead of like putting in each student's like name and personal information in this table, that's irrelevant, right? Because you're just going to be repeating information. Here they just use the ID number, or social security number in this case, to make a connection between this piece of information and this student. One student may actually enroll multiple times, so that's why you see here that social security numbers used multiple times, and that would be what we call a one. There's only one Jacob Smith to many relationship. Okay, but it is a relationship in information. So the thinking is we make the information more efficient by not having to repeat all the information in this table just because the student's registering. The same way, we can take the course ID here, 11111, and tie it into the course table up here, so we know that this little entry, right, is Jacob R. Smith taking Intro to Java 1. Hey, good class, right? But you see, that's how a database works. So there's relationships that happen, okay? And that, when you set up a database administrators and designers think about those things and how the data interacts and how to make it the most efficient. We don't think about that a lot these days in terms of how we use memory and storage because it's so cheap and available. But in the old days, storage and memory was really expensive. And so they tried to make their databases as efficient as possible. And you know what? It's still a good practice because it also makes them work faster. But a proper relational database, folks, will have many tables that interrelate from one to another. So here they start to show some of those relationships. So they're showing, like, for example, in the course table, how that course ID relates to this course ID in this table. Okay? And, there's the whole concept, and I'm not going to go deep into it, but of this key and foreign key thing going on. So some fields will be what we call key fields. They have to be unique. We index to them, so we keep track of the whole table based upon that field. And then these connections can also be described. Often they do what they call an entity relationship diagram. And in some of the better database tools, you can actually do it graphically, where you can just drag from one table to another, and it finds the links and it assumes what type of connection it is. Sometimes there's a one-to-one relationship, sometimes it's one-to-many, or sometimes it's many-to-many, and those can all be enforced through the code. So they're talking here about those constraints. So for example, there's domain constraints, primary key constraints, and foreign key constraints. I really prefer to leave these topics for your database instructor, who might be me next semester, who knows. But those are important concepts, not that we're completely ignoring them here, but for the level of work we're doing in this class, it's not really much of an issue. Yeah. And frankly, most of that work is really not done on the application level. It's really done more on the database level during the design process. But it is important to understand that that does exist. All right. Some languages do, enforce what we call integrity of a database, so that those connections that are forged are valid and legitimate and work. And often, when it's not set up correctly, can really cause a lot of problems. So most database administrators would never release a database that's not working correctly, especially to developers like us, because then we could really even screw it up further. So, all right. When you learn how to work with databases, the predominant way to write scripts for a database in order to program them, set them up, retrieve information, store information, etc., is a language called SQL or SQL. And you see this. I love that this author doesn't pick one or the other, because there's kind of like this whole argument in the IT community about it. Actually, some people will say, "Well, no, it's SQL," and some people say, "No. It's an acronym. It's Structured Query Language, so it's SQL." And you know what? Both are considered valid. It really kind of depends on what school of thought you come from, and I'm not going to walk that path and tell you the argument. It's not even worth arguing, in my opinion. All right? So just go with it. Call it one or the other. I think worst case scenario is SQL. I think is probably preferred, by some. But SQL is what a lot of people say. Okay. I do want to point out the fact that this author does provide in the supplements tutorials on how to work with several different structures. So they show all the Oracle ones, basically. So there's a Java database, so that's one that's actually built into the product that we're not going to use. We're going to focus on MySQL. There's also one for Oracle. If you want to learn this stuff, there's plenty of stuff out on the web to learn the basics. But what you will need to understand, and I'll guide you with this, is just basic statements for selecting information from a table and then being able to insert a record, update a record, or delete a record from a database. That's really kind of the only operations that we're going to be doing. All right. Now we're going to get to the point where we need to do some work, but there's some really important considerations here. Now, I asked before how many of you took the database class, all right, and I anticipate, because of the response of that, how many of you have taken the PHP class. So how many people have taken the first PHP class here at Gateway? It's okay to not raise your hand. Sort of, you're in progress, or the same category as before?
Same category before.
All right, so, and that's okay. All right, because what happens in that class is two things. The first thing you do is when you learn how to code PHP, PHP is a server-side web language for programming. That means that you either have to take your code and load it on a server like Apollo that runs PHP and it basically interprets it on the fly, runs the code and then gives you your web page. Or what a lot of beginning developers do is they'll load a piece of software on their local machine. Often for Windows machines it'll be a piece of software called XAMPP or WAMP, W-A-M-P, which creates a local web server on your own machine that's capable of running PHP and also lets you run the MySQL database right on your own machine. That's a separate piece of software. And the instructions in this book, in this section, these are critical to doing the work and the homework, okay? When you get to this point in the chapter, these instructions are based upon the fact that you are doing this on your own machine on a local web server. And guess what? That's not how we're doing it in class. I'm going to take you guys up a notch because when you go out to the real world, this is how you're going to do it anyhow, so you may as well prepare. I'm going to have you connect to a remote server, which is going to be Apollo. Okay. If you do happen to have XAMPP loaded on your machine, I don't even think I have it loaded on this laptop. Oh, I guess I do. Let's go ahead and launch it, just so you can see the product. And if you do choose one to run locally, this is the product that I recommend. So you see how it's spelled? XAMPP. And what that really stands for is Apache, MySQL, PHP, and I forget what the last one is. Anyhow, but what that does is it runs local servers for each one of these things. So you notice how there's Apache, MySQL, FileZilla, for FTP, Mercury, and Tomcat. And this is kind of interesting because we haven't gotten here yet, but Tomcat is a Java server for web-based Java applications. Okay, so at some point you might even consider loading this product. If those of you that are taking PHP currently, my guess is that whoever is teaching you will probably recommend this product. Although I will tell you there's a different product called WAMP, W-A-M-P, that I actually think is a little easier to use for students. This one's a whole lot more powerful. Interestingly, this is developed by the Apache Foundation, which is now owned by somebody else, and I forget who that somebody else is. Hopefully it's not Oracle again, but it might be. But it's the same people that create the Apache web server software. And really what this software allows you to do is turn your own local PC into a full-blown web server. And yes, you can actually use it to deliver web pages to the public if you really wanted to. It's just a matter of configuring your router the right way and turning this on and allowing your machine to sit there. I don't really recommend that. What most aspiring developers do, or even professional developers, is sometimes they'll get like a PHP project that needs a database and blah, 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 blah. And what they'll do is they'll just do all the development work on their own machine before they push it out to something else. Or they get a copy of the database from their database administrator, load it into MySQL here, and then run it on their own machine to do all the testing before they actually connect it up to the real thing. And then they just adjust their connection string to the database so it runs with the real database. And that way they can practice all the interactions without actually destroying any data. So you see like the advantage there? So this is a piece of software you might want to consider installing at some point if you don't already. When you do take the PHP class, you don't have to use this product. I still tell people it's better to work on Apollo, but some people have issues with connecting to Apollo, especially if they have bad bandwidth at home, and often opt to do this because this does allow you to have a complete development environment on your computer without needing an external connection to the internet. So that's the reason why you might want it. So that's XAMPP. You notice none of my servers are running, and that's by default. They all have start buttons available. So I'm just turning it off now and stepping away. All right, we're at roughly the halfway point in the class, and I think this is a great time to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and work on this relative to Apollo. All right, so let's take 5. I'm going to pause the video in the interim. One really important thing that you guys will need to be aware of, so those of you watching the video, is you'll need to ensure that you have a MySQL account on the Apollo server. If you do not, you will have to make sure to contact me to create that account for you. So it's possible, depending on whether you're full-time or part-time, that you don't have that. So you'll be trying to do some of these commands on Apollo and they just won't work. So in that case, please email me. I'll set up the account. It doesn't take much time to create, and then you can get working on your stuff. Okay, now that I am sure that everybody in class here has an account, and we made sure, and for those that didn't, we did go ahead and create them, now we can proceed with the next step. However, now we need a piece of software to be able to take these next steps, because you notice that these are asking us to do it from a DOS command prompt. So if you were running a local server on your own machine, like XAMPP or WAMP, or if you're on a Macintosh, MAMP, with an M, right? You would be able to execute these commands from your local command prompt. However, the problem with Windows systems is that they don't interface natively command prompt wise with Linux systems. And you know what? And that's actually a little bit of a lie. In Windows 10, some of the later builds, they've included some tools from what they call the Linux subsystem for Windows. And so the PowerShell and the command prompt does actually allow for SSH commands from the command prompt. However, they're buggy and they're not full featured. So I'm going to still recommend that we use a third-party tool to do our work. What we need in order to talk to Linux on a command line level is what we call an SSH program. Okay, there's one that I recommend, and most professionals, this is like their go-to, and it's called Putty. And to download the product, you simply go to putty.org, Putty.org. And you'll end up on this really primitive-looking website. It is, but they haven't changed it in since forever. But it's still totally valid. Of course, this is the product that we want. So please click the link to download Putty here. It will take you to a secondary page. And this is where you kind of go through and look for stuff. Now they do have installers that you can download. And if you want to use an installer, you can download this MSI file. But what I usually recommend to students is if you just want to just grab the file itself, you can just come here. Because ultimately the installer, all it does is it gives you the executable file. So I just usually come right to the executable and grab it. I've already got this downloaded on my machine, so whichever option you choose, that's up to you. And then, when I download weird little software packages like this, what I typically do is I have a folder that I keep on my machine for weird software packages like this or for installation files. I just call it software. I put it on my second drive, and then inside here I have all, sorts of things that I might use. Notice one thing I have in here is the connector file for Java, which we'll talk about later. And then somewhere inside here I've got Putty. And it just sits as an exe file. Often what people will do is sometimes they'll create shortcuts and then put it in their start menu if you really plan on using it that much. The other thing I'll point out to you as well is if you're in Windows, you can go to the Windows Store and do a search, because there are a bunch of really cool third-party tools aside from Putty. If you do a search for SSH, and you'll find that there's lots of different clients that you can download. One that I've used a little bit is this one, Remote Terminal. And you know, I haven't had a chance to try all of them. I'm fine with Putty, frankly, so I guess I kind of just don't mess with it. Some of the other ones do have nicer looking interfaces, so that's pretty important to note. The other thing I'll tell you is if you're a Mac person, and I don't think I have any in class here, but I know I have at least one of them online. For a Mac, you can natively use the Mac Terminal program. And you know, if I get a chance here, I'll try to demonstrate that in a little bit. And if you bring up the Mac Terminal program, you can, and for Mac users, you bring up your Spotlight search, type terminal, press enter, your terminal will come up, and then you just type SSH space apollo.gtc.edu basically to get to it. That's really all it takes. Okay, so for Windows users, we just have that extra step of installing software. But I'm going to go ahead and launch Putty. And the one thing, it's a pretty simple interface. In fact, you don't really need to do any settings on it, honestly, because it should just work in its native form. Just make sure that it's set for SSH. And then right here in this little window, type apollo.gtc.edu. So I'm hoping that you guys are caught up with me here in class. Let me know if you're not. This font will come across kind of small on the screen, so for those of you watching the video, hopefully you can read this. If not, try to zoom in if you can. So you'll get a login prompt, and yeah, SSH. And now once you get to this prompt, now you just log in with your regular Apollo username and password, the same ones you use for FileZilla and FTP. So I have a junk account that I use, frankly, and I'm just going to show you it. I'm just going to, so that's my junk account, and I use this in all my classes, so it's nothing particularly special, but it does allow me to go in and do all the work that I need to do. And oh, it's telling me that it's not allowed. Okay, maybe I mistyped my password. Oh, I know what I did. Yeah, I mistyped my password. The one thing that, don't freak out to this, but SSH programs, when you are logging in, unlike most password prompts, it will not echo back your characters as you're typing them on the keyboard, which is a little disconcerting for those not used to it. So when you're, yeah, because you thought it wasn't taking your keystrokes, right? Yeah, it is actually taking your keystrokes. It's a security thing. You know, and you got to think about this when you're typing it in and it's echoing back like a dot or an asterisk or something. I mean, a person looking at that over your shoulder could say, oh, there's 6 letters in their password. So I know that it's a 6-letter password. It cuts down the amount of attempts that they would have to make to crack it. I'm going to pause the video here for a second because I want to make sure that I'm not going to be recreating the same database that I had before. So pause for a moment. All right. Now that you're at the prompt like this, our next task is to actually create the database. So now I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of things. And one is something that we already talked about here in class, and I'm closing the tab on purpose, is there is a graphical interface that we can use, right? And I think I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if I recorded it, and that's why I'm doing that now, which is called phpMyAdmin. And please note the URL, so apollo.gtc.edu/phpMyAdmin. If I'm already logged in, that's why it just popped up, but if you try to hit this page, it will ask you for your Apollo database username and password. For most students, your username and password is identical to your database one. It is possible that it's not, though, so just be aware. We try to set it up so that they're identical, but they could be different. So in some cases, you can come in here and do most of the work that we're about to do from the command prompt, except for create a database. And that's locked out by intent through the graphical interface, because we don't want people in here just willy-nilly creating databases. Okay, so let's go back to the command prompt. And then, okay, so the whole point of showing you that tool in the background is once you have established the database, you can pretty much do all your other database work through that graphical interface, if you so choose. I'm also in the browser tab. I'm going to go back to my PDF again. I keep kind of like bumping off of it and then having to come back. I want to get back to that set of instructions. All right, because this is the set of instructions we're shooting to create. All right, so now we're going to actually try to follow these instructions somewhat. And so remember, I'm working on a remote system. The instructions in the book are designed for a local web server. So here we go. Once you get logged in successfully, so you got your username and your password in, and you got the welcome screen, and you notice we're logging into a Linux server. It's running Ubuntu version 16.04. That's a long-term support version, very stable. And it tells you a little bit about the system, and then it drops you in at your prompt. Okay. Now we need to, inside of this operating system, we're connected to a Linux operating system on a command line level that's remote. We are now going to launch the MySQL monitor software, which is a command line, a relational database management system. Okay. So for those of you that know databases already, this is like a primitive version of SQL Server Management Studio, is the way you can think of it. Okay. So the command to launch it is this, MySQL. That's actually enough to launch it, but don't press enter yet. Then type space, -u, space, your username, space, -p. So the -u says, here's my username. The -p says, please prompt me for a password. You can also type your password in plain text here if you wish. I don't recommend that, right? What if somebody's looking over your shoulder, right? All right. So now it's asking for the password. Put in your password. Press enter. Okay. Now you'll notice you're back at a prompt, but you are now logged into MySQL Monitor. You can see it on the screen here. It records your connection, tells you your server version, etc., etc. Notice the copyright by Oracle. Thank you very much. They do own the software, even though it's open source. And you're at a MySQL prompt. Now here's what you database experts or aspiring experts should know. That any of the commands that you would type to create SQL code, like in SQL Server, for example, you can just type right here at the prompt and it will work. Same code you would type in SQL Server Management Studio. All we need to do is create a database. So here's what we're going to do. Just type create space, and okay, so some of you are already going, wait, I thought you had to type those commands in all uppercase. Yeah, old days, yeah. New days, doesn't matter. I'm just telling you, okay? So I'm just typing it lowercase because it's more comfortable. And we're going to create a database, so I'm just going to type database, and then a space. And then here's where you have to follow my convention. We have a convention on the system so that your database ends up like in your database tree structure. Type your username, an underscore, and then the database that we need to build for this class is going to be called Java Book. Okay? So type JAVABOOK. Add a semicolon to the end. And if you've typed that all incorrectly, go ahead and press enter. Okay. Now notice, because we're working with a remote server, there's a lot of steps that we didn't have to take that the local web server people had to take. Right? So we can actually see, we're actually at this point already. See, that's the command that we just typed in. Okay. Right. They actually had to set up the whole environment first. I did that for you already. That's the beauty of it. All right. They do now want us to upload a script file. Okay, but we are going to take a pause here before we take this step, because this is a big step. You got to be ready for it. Okay. And we also have to talk about a couple of other things first. All right. First of all, really, frankly, we don't have to do any of the rest of this stuff from the prompt, but feeding a script file into the database is easier from the prompt, in my opinion, than it is from internal to the like PHP my admin. That's just an opinion, mind you, but I want to show you the correct way to do this. we're going to actually jump over to our core shell now. So I want you to go over to the core shell, and in Unit 4, attached to the Chapter 34 exercises, I've included a script file called script.sql. I want you to click on that and download it to your system. So you see that it downloaded. It looked like I already have a copy, right? Because it put like a 1 around it.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna show it in folder here, right here. And you know what? Knowing that it's somewhere else in my folder, it's no surprise because I've taught this class many times. I'm actually going to drag that over to my desktop for right now. And there's a reason I'm doing that, and I'll explain in just a moment. Now I'm going to go to the desktop and find that file, and then I'm going to rename it. I'm going to remove the parentheses around it and the 1. So I'm just renaming it so it's just script.sql. Okay. Now I want you to right-click that file and open it up with a text editor. I'm going to use Notepad++. You can use any text editor you want. I really don't care what that is. Of course, it opens on the second screen, so here it is. And I want to show you what this file contains. Okay. So what the author has done for us is he's created a SQL file that's full of SQL commands, and there's a whole bunch of them. You know, there's more than just a couple, that goes through and creates the database that we need for the exercises for us. Thank you, author. Right? So we don't have to do all the creation and enter data into it and all that stuff. And I want to just kind of give you a really quick little look into the file and show you a couple of things. First of all, there's some commands right at the top that I've commented out. So I've taken his file and I've tweaked it a little bit. Okay? So what this file would do is, if you already have the database that we just created, it would drop it first and then go through and create it. And then it would also go through and create a user just like the one in the book with all the right permissions. We don't need to do any of that. That stuff's all preset for you. All right? Now, once you have the database created, which we did manually from the command line, the first command that's issued is use that database, so that when we issue our subsequent commands, we know that they're attached to that database. Okay? All right, we'll come and check it. Yeah, we'll come and check it in a minute. The next thing that happens is he goes through and issue a series of commands. Once again, dropping tables if they already exist, so he doesn't want you to recreate, stuff just in case it's broken. Because sometimes what happens is students will have to go through this a couple of times, but the database will always be there. But if you're redoing it, this will delete the tables if they already exist. And then if you look at the subsequent statements, you don't have to be a SQL expert here, but it goes through the process next of creating all the tables we need with all the right settings, all the right columns, all the right fields, and it keeps going and going and going. And then it starts to insert data into each one of the tables. Right, so it inserts data into each of the tables we just created. A whole bunch of it. It's building the database. It will also check to drop a couple of other tables, and all this stuff happens automatically. So it does all this work for us. Yep, all, and then it does a commit to the database, which saves it all, and then we're all done. So the point of this file is, and you want to use my file, is you don't want to recreate the database again, because you can't do it externally. That's the other problem, is you can't code inject a new database on Apollo. We don't allow that. It has to be run from the system. So that's why we do it manually. But that's the SQL file. I just wanted to show it to you, just so you know. Now we need to take that file and we need to get it on Apollo. Okay? But here's the trick. We got to get it in the right place in Apollo. So I'm going to go back to Putty. I'm still running Putty. And I'm going to type a command. I'm going to type exit to go back to the regular prompt. So now I'm at a bash prompt. And I know it's a bash prompt because it's a $sign. And I'm going to type a command. I'm going to type pwd. And I want you to notice that and what that stands for is print working directory. And it shows you my active current directory at the prompt. Here's the problem though. When I try to upload my file to Apollo, I can't access that through FileZilla, that root directory. So, and I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to bring up my FileZilla. I'm going to log into Apollo using my account. Oops, except I didn't put in a username or password. That's a little problematic. Put in a username or password. Alright, and now I'm in there. I'm going to go full screen on this so you can see it. And now even though it looks like I'm in the root of my account, I'm actually inside of a folder called public_HTML. So if I go back to my prompt and I type this command called ls, which is a directory listing, and press enter, you can see there's one directory inside of there called public_HTML. If you want a more verbose output, type ls-al, and it shows you hidden files, folders, and everything. This is a directory. How do I know that this is a directory? Because the very first letter of this line is a D. And that's the lowest level in my FTP program where I can upload a file to. So what I have to do from the command prompt is this. I have to type cd space public_HTML, press enter. Well, it actually happened. You can't see it. Here's how you verify you're in the right place. Now type pwd again, and it shows you you're in that folder. So now at the prompt, I'm in the same folder that I see in the background here inside of Apollo. How can I verify that? I can do that ls-al command one more time, and now you can see all the same folders here: advanced PHP, images, old stuff, index, web 1, web 2, WordPress, all that stuff is all there, right? That's how I know I'm in the same spot. Now back to FileZilla. I put my SQL script where? On my desktop. And the reason I do that, it's the easiest location to transfer from, because if I scroll up in this left side window up at the top, I can click right on the desktop, and then I'll find my SQL file in here somewhere. There it is. I'm going to click it. I'm going to drag it over. I'm not going to drop it in a folder though. Really careful not to drop it in a folder. I want to put it down here at the bottom and transfer the file over. Okay, so now that SQL file is on the server, accessible to the MySQL monitor program, the command prompt. So here we go. Back over to Putty. Now we're going to log back into MySQL again. So let's see if you guys remember how to do it. So it's MySQL space -u space your username space -p, prompts you for the password. After you press enter, type in your password, press enter, and hopefully you have a MySQL prompt. Okay. Now I'm going to flip back to the instructions in the book, if I can find my darn browser, right? And now we're basically at this point. We're going to type this command. And actually, I think that command is included in the SQL file, but it doesn't hurt to retype it. Don't type it just like it is in the book, though. There's a little bit of a caveat here. Here's the caveat. We want to make sure that we use that database, but we have to remember ours has our username in front of it, so type your username, underscore, and then Java book, and then a semicolon. Press enter. It says database changed. I assure you nothing changed. All that changed is that we're now attached to it. So that just means that every command that we run from now on is attributed to that database. That's all it does. All right. Next thing is we already know in the background we're in the right directory and our file is there. So now we're going to type this next command. We're going to run the script file. So we're just going to type source space, and then just like it's listed there, script all lowercase .sql and a semicolon. And I want you to hold on to your seats here, because when I press enter, what's going to happen is it's going to read in that file and execute all the commands in it. So a whole bunch of database commands all at once. Here we go. Pressing enter. Boom. All right. Now a lot of students will go, oh my God, I got a bunch of error messages. And I'll try to warn you about these. Some of these error messages are attributed to the fact that the script is trying to drop tables that you maybe had already created, just in case you made a mistake.
Right.
That's all it's doing. And that's not a mistake. But if you scroll back up and through, it'll show all the queries that did work correctly. There's a few that won't. Some will give you a warning. Don't worry about any of the warnings or errors. It's fine. And here's how we're going to verify it's fine. We're actually done at the prompt here, so let's just go ahead and type exit. And then at the Putty prompt, if you want to close Putty, you type exit again. But actually type it correctly if you would, not like I did. All right, so now Putty's closed. And it's always considered polite when you connect to a Linux system by a command line that you exit out cleanly, because otherwise the session does stay open for a while. Not that it's really an issue for Apollo, but on older systems it used to be kind of an issue. All right, so now let's go back to our browser quick, and let's open up phpMyAdmin. So I have a short link to it on my bookmark bar here in Chrome, so I don't have to type it, but it's apollo.gtc.edu, phpMyAdmin. If you're not already logged in, you will be prompted to log in. And then what I'd like you to do is find your database account on the side column. Here's mine. I do that on purpose so it pops up at the top. See it, like my strategery there? It's not because I'm dumb and lazy. Well, maybe a little. And then you'll notice that the database that we created is listed here, right? And then if you expand the expander, and actually you can click on the root of the database, it will show you all the tables. Take a look at this, folks. These are all the tables that that script created. And if you go to like a table like staff, I think that's one of the first ones we work with, you'll notice that, well, it doesn't have any stuff in there. It's empty. We can go back again. I'm trying to think of one that might have maybe student. Okay, students got a couple of entries in here, so you see a couple of student entries. But phpMyAdmin, being a database management system, it gives us the front-end capability of actually interacting with the data. So if I wanted to like edit something, I could come in here, click edit, change the information, and then commit it back to the database right from this interface. So one of the things that we might be doing as we're working is the fact that like you'll do something through Java and you want to see if it actually worked, then you'll come back in here and you'll see, oh yeah, look, it worked. Or I'm running a query, what should it be pulling back? I can verify it by looking in the database and making sure it comes back. Now for some of you, you might ask the question where it's like, well, phpMyAdmin is great and all that, but are there any other pieces of software I could possibly use to interface with phpMyAdmin? And the answer is yes. In fact, there's a whole bunch of them. This one just happens to run on Apollo, and it's easy, and for web developers, this is probably going to be your go-to product. But some people like to do higher level database work and take time writing their scripts, and in which case you might want to consider a different kind of product. So here's one that I recommend that I've used in the past quite a bit. I don't use it as much anymore, but it's called MySQL Workbench. All right. So if you are interested in downloading a third-party product to work with your databases, you can come here. You can download it now. For those of you that are kind of like catching on to like the feel and the look of like an Oracle website, yeah, guess where this product comes from? I believe it's another Oracle product. I don't know if I have this one installed on this machine, but let me just type it in and see. Well, I do. All right. I'm going to go ahead and launch it. And of course, my computer is being a little resistant right now. It probably wants to go home already. All right, so now it's launching. And I'm just going to bring it up really quick. But if you like, for example, if you are comfortable working with SQL Server Management Studio, you'll be more comfortable working in this product. And you can see I already have a connection to Apollo established. If you don't, you just click this little plus sign, and then it asks you a bunch of details. And instead of filling them in here, I'll just show you from here how to do it, because the settings are already in there. And so I just use Apollo for the connection name. You just put in the host. The port you should leave alone. That should be default. Put in your username. It will prompt you for your password, and you can test the connection from here to make sure it works. And see, it's asking for the password, and then hopefully it's successful. And then once you have that successful connection made, you'll get a little tile like this in here that you can then click on, and then it auto connects to your database, and then you're dropped into an environment that, oh my God, looks a whole lot more like SQL Server Management Studio. And so when you run a SQL command in here, and I say use a Java book, just for example, and then I go ahead and I execute it. See, this is the execute, and then you'll see it'll show the results down here. And if you ran a query, it would show the results. But you might be more comfortable in this environment. So I'm just showing you a tool that you can quickly use. That's MySQL Workbench. This is one of many. I think this is one of the better ones, frankly. It just depends on how you prefer to work. For most web developers, PHP-MyAdmin, this interface will probably be adequate for your needs. When I was doing a lot of professional work, I really didn't have much need to go beyond this product to do anything I needed to do. Because you can also execute SQL commands in this environment. You just simply go to this window and type in your stuff. And not only that, it's got like these little tools here that allow you to kind of auto-generate the queries. And as you select stuff, it like brings up short lists of what's available. Okay, just so you know. All right. Now we're going to go back and try to actually do some work. And we're going to try to see if we can squeeze this in before we leave tonight. So here's what I'm going to do with you guys. I'm going to actually take the code that you guys need to work in Eclipse. So I'd like you right now to open up Eclipse, and I want to see if we can establish a connection. Because if we can get a connection, reading and writing from Eclipse to our new database, when we come back next week, we can go right into the code and do the exercises, and we'll be golden. But I'm hoping that you see like how much time this takes just to get these pieces in place, and that's why we're not like diving into homework right away. It would be kind of unfair if you don't have a database or a connection to it. All right, so that's my working folder. I'm going to let that open up. And really, just so you know, what we're going to be doing next is we're going to go into basically an exercise here. Like they go through like, you know, this whole process of, you know, showing you how to use databases and whatever, and that's not really my aim here is to teach you databases. We're going to this JDBC section is really where we're going to operate, but the whole point of this is basically that whenever you're writing a Java program, Java has this feature built within it. It's an API that allows you to interface with databases, and this is available only in the enterprise versions of Java. That's why we're using version 8 of Java to do our development work, where the regular SE versions are version 10 and 11 now. Version 8's the enterprise, the stable enterprise version that has the JDBC connectors in it, and you can see that, for example, there's drivers that you have to load in to make the connections to whatever platform that you're doing. And then the whole point of this, folks, is basically that we're going to complete an exercise, you know, where we're going to walk basically through these steps here in this section. So starting, I guess, here, where we're going to build this application now. I'm not going to like walk you manually through the process of creating the application. I'm going to give you the code, and guess how I'm going to give it to you? Code share. I'm going to drop it in the code share. You're right on. And then you guys will just copy the code into your application, and then change the connection string so your username and password are in there and database name, and then we'll see if it works, and we'll call it a night. Okay, you guys ready? Yes, Mr. Kinnis.
Smile and nod.
Yeah, smile and nod. All right. Back over to Eclipse, wherever the heck it is. It's way at the bottom, right there. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new project folder. So I'm going to create a new Java project because we're in a new chapter. I'm going to call this Chapter 34. And you know what? I'm going to leave the space out of it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. And I'll let it build up the folder. Now I'm going to go over to the Chapter 34 folder. I'm going to get a right click there on the source folder, create a new class file. All right. Let's just call this simple JDBC. We're just trying to get it to work. And click finish. All right. Now I've already created this program many times, so I'm going to be pulling up from one of my previously built examples. But first I want to point you guys to CodeShare. So remember that I have a link to my CodeShare in the resources, on the resources page of our course shell. Right at the top is CodeShare. So this is, for anybody who's actively online with us, the code I drop in here is only going to be available for 24 hours. They kind of made a change in CodeShare. They used to leave it there forever, and they've okay, some clever student was typing stuff in there. All right, so if you go to that URL, I'm not sure if you guys can read that. It's codeshare.io, and then it's 160 lowercase r uppercase L. That's the link to this page. So maybe some of you will catch it in time. Otherwise, you'll have to type in the code. Sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and find my simple JDBC code. All right. And I have it up on screen. It actually popped up inside of Notepad++, not on accident, totally on purpose. Because I'm just going to highlight it from here, copy it, and then I'm going to move over to the CodeShare environment, and I'm going to paste it in. So those of you here in class, oops, yeah, don't paste it into the URL. Paste it into the document. All right, so I'm pasting it into the document. And notice this allows me to actually change the color coding here to what language are we using? Java. So now it's all color coded for Java. So those of you in the environment, make sure that it can get a little confusing, and I recommend that maybe you copy paste one at a time. So get into the environment, get in there, do a Control-A, do a Control-C, and then bring all the code back over to Eclipse. I'm going to do the same. I've already got it copied, so I'm going to switch over to Eclipse. Right. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm noticing that I probably have a conflict with the name, but we can fix that. So let's just paste that all in, and I'm replacing everything there. And the problem that I have is I named mine the JDBC with all caps, so I'm just going to fix that. All right. There's only one import statement inside here, and that imports the Java SQL libraries. That allows us to run SQL commands in our application. And then it's a combination of stuff. So I'm letting you guys get to the point where you're all pasted in. Are you good? Vaughn is saying no. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Vaughn. All right. So you'll notice that this code, this is like a little bit of legacy code here, because I'm going to go piece by piece. Let's talk about a couple of things first. The first thing that you're going to notice is I'm writing kind of an old school console application here. I'm not writing a GUI application. I'm just trying to get the connection to work. Now the stuff that we're writing in this little section is something that you can move into all of your database-based applications throughout the remainder of the course. So the connection strings will work. I want to kind of go piece by piece here and explain a couple of things. First of all, we do have the public static void main, which is normal, but you'll notice that there's an addition of an exception handler thrown in, so that, and the reason it's there is, well, if we can't connect to the database, do we want the program to crash? No, we don't. We want to get an error message to know what's happening. So that's why that's there. The next thing that we do is we are going to load the JDBC driver for MySQL. That's this line of code here. Okay, so I got a comment in there saying what we're doing, and then the code to make it happen. The next line is an output to the console that's just going to show us that if the driver loaded, we're going to get a message on the screen saying it worked. Driver loaded. See the thinking? Now, the fascinating part about that is this. When you've done console work in the past, you've been, you do all your stuff in the console, right? But our aim here is still to write GUI programs. So that means we can still use the console? Yes. But it's for our benefit, not the users. Right? So the program will load, the driver will load, we'll get a message in the console that it worked. Right? Next thing, we're going to establish a connection to the database. We pull in the connection drivers, and then we put in the connection details. Now notice, this is still pointing to Kronos. Yeah, and you know what the funny thing is Kronos is operational, so this would actually work. But we are working on Apollo now. So we're going to put in apollo.gtc.edu. Notice that the URL does not contain an HTTP. It contains a call to MySQL as a protocol and to my particular database.
Yeah.
And then in plain text, you're going to put in your username and your password, and yes, my password is password.
Excellent.
Okay. So for some of you that might struggle with this assignment, here's a tip. You can actually copy my connection code here if you don't have a database working, and you can connect to mine to do the work. It's okay. All right. Just hang tight. Okay. Because we haven't gotten to the part that fixes the error yet. This is kind of to prevent you from racing too far ahead. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a statement, and the statement is necessary for executing any SQL code. So it's a construct, it's an object for allowing for SQL injection into your program. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to execute a statement, but when you execute a statement, it needs a container to hold the result of the query. So we're running a really simple query here, and this is in plain text SQL format. So if you were writing this in a SQL program or a database management system, this is the code you would write to run the query. And it says select first name, middle initial, last name from the student table where last name equals Smith.
So you can just drop in SQL commands into Java?
Yes.
As long as you have the driver running?
Yes. Yeah. And that's the part we don't have yet. So those of you that are racing ahead, we don't have the driver loaded into the program yet.
Right.
It's a separate step. Next thing that happens is because we're going to potentially have more than one result, we have to kind of step through the table. And you can do this in a for each loop, but in this case we did a while loop. And as long as there's a result, it goes on to the next result. And every time it finds something, it's going to output it to the console for us to see that it's working. This is something you wouldn't normally put in every program, because I wouldn't want to output to the console. I'd want to output to our GUI interface, whatever it is we create, whether it's web-based or operating system native. And then always the polite thing to do when you're working with a database is to close the connection to free up the record so somebody else can manipulate it after you. Okay. So the piece that we're missing, though, is we do need to add the database connection driver, and that's not automatic. Okay. Now, what I think is probably the easiest way to do it, not that you couldn't pull it down from online somewhere, is in our core shell, I've provided the connection driver right there. So if you go back to Unit 4, go to the assignment for Unit 4. Right where you found the SQL file is the connector file. So I'm going to go ahead and click that and download it. And notice this one's saying, oh, this kind of file can harm your computer. You know why? Because a jar file is basically a compressed file and can contain, and often do contain, executables. And what it stands for is Java archive. So it's basically a Java zip file. We are going to keep it, so let it download. It's probably being scanned for viruses right now, I'm sure. And then I'm going to go show in folder, and okay, there it is. It's got a 1 after it. You know what? Frankly, it doesn't really matter. Just know that it's in your downloads folder. Okay. Back over to Eclipse. And while we're inside this interface, I want you to go up to the project menu and choose properties. All right. From there, we want to go to the Java build path menu. And now we need to add that connector file as a library in our project. So the way we do that is we go to the Libraries tab, and this is an external jar file. So I'm going to click Add External Jar. And then I'm going to go find it in my file system. It was in the Downloads folder, wherever that happens to be. There it is. Click. Go ahead and open. Now it added it in. Click Apply. So now it's attached, and if you notice on the side here, yeah, it pulled into the project, and then we say OK. All right, save your work. Hit save, and you know what? Well, I got 2 warnings here. I better check my warnings, right? No, I guess not. Okay. I don't see any flags in the code. It must be relative to something else. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. All right. And what's happening now you do have to have a connection to the internet, and here's a secondary consideration. We right now are on campus, and we're connected to GTC wireless. Okay, so mine's failing too. So we had a little bit of a problem. It did say the driver loaded, right? So that worked. It did say the database connected. But it's saying that this table doesn't exist. Yeah. So you know what? I got to go check my database. So the connection actually worked. But for those of you that are off campus, please listen to this very carefully. If you are off campus, or if you are connected to the guest network here on campus through Wi-Fi, you have to establish a VPN connection first to get the database to work. It's critical. We don't allow external connections to our database without VPN. It's a security risk, basically. All right, so it's telling me that this table doesn't exist, so I'm going to go over to phpMyAdmin now. So in my browser, right, I got phpMyAdmin open. I'm going to go through this tree structure here. I found Java book, right? In fact, I can find, oh wait, I don't even have one called student. You guys noticing that? There's student 1 and student 2. Let's click on student 1. Okay, there's some stuff in there, and there's a couple of Smiths, which is what we're looking for, right? Why don't I go ahead and actually click back on the root here, and I'm going to actually edit my table. Well, does that make sense? Should I edit my table or should I edit my code? Yeah, let's edit the code. I mean, I have a student table there. Why would I go changing the database to make it work with my code? All right? See the no-brainer there?
Yeah.
All right. So back over to Eclipse, and I'm seeing that I actually call it student what? 1. So I'm just adding student 1. Do Control S. We're running it again. I'm going to hide this little window here. And now, okay, I'm not sure what that's about. Did yours work?
Mine worked before when I had students, but I do have a student too going on.
Yeah. All right, let me try that again. I'm not sure what error I'm getting. Let's say, I guess I got to check the. Oh, I got a null pointer error. Okay, you know what? I'm tempted to actually change the database. So I'm going to jump back over to phpMyAdmin. I'm not sure what's going on that's causing that issue. I'm going to check each one of these tables. Okay, that one's empty. This one's not. All right, go back. And I'm actually going to change. You know, and I'm trying to think of a couple different ways to accomplish this without causing the problem. See, the null pointer exception it indicates that we're not finding the resource, basically. Yeah.
Just right there, updates. Doesn't have first name, doesn't have middle initial, last name.
Yes, and Nathan's noticing exactly the problem. This table doesn't even have all the stuff in there that I need. You know what? Why don't I actually create a new table?
Yep.
So see how there's a new command here? So let's go ahead and create a new table. And So we're going to do a little bit of work here. This is taking a little bit longer than I had hoped.
That's fine.
And I hope you guys are okay with that because we are past at the end of class time.
So, family, first name?
Yeah, and in fact, let's think about what we might want to have in here. Maybe we do want to have an ID field, so I'm just going to call one ID. An integer is fine,
Oh, okay. Yeah,
right? The length and the value, I'm not really too concerned about that. And then you'll notice, I mean, for those of you that have done database work before, you'll be familiar with this stuff. And what I'm looking for here is the auto increment option, and I forget where they put that. We don't worry about the collation. You know, and in fact, you know what we'll do is we'll just type it in manually. I'm sorry, say that again?
Is that a C field you just do? Or identity?
I'm trying to get it to auto increment this particular field. I just forget how to do it at the moment, so let's not worry about that too much. But we did need, no, I'm just going to go right to Eclipse and copy this.
First name,
It needs
middle initial, and last name.
first name. What's the type? I think a varchar is fine. 20 characters, I think will do it.
MI.
MI, that was lowercase.
Yep.
That'll be also a varchar. 20 for middle initial.
Oh, middle initial.
How about 2?
Check
The-
your index.
You want an index?
If you-
Yeah, you know, let's just keep it simple for right now. I'm just going to keep it to like real bare root stuff. Because I just want to get it working and I want to go home. Last name. All right, and you know, ultimately we probably might put more stuff in here, but we do want to name the table, and this one we're just going to name student.
Change last name to Varkar.
Yeah, thank you. Good point. Varchar. And then let's make that 20 also, just for now. All right. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Now what that does is it generates the SQL statements for me automatically. Then it shows me the table.
Right.
And then you know what? I think I can actually start to insert data into it if I'd like to. So I could go to Browse. This is in PHP MyAdmin, mind you. Oh, it wants this. Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
All right. Let's go here and go to Student. And I'm trying to figure out how to get
Go
this.
to the actual SQL.
Yeah, there's actually there's an insert. I'm just trying to find the insert. So let's go here. So in this view, here's the insert. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert some information, and then it gives you these fields, right? So the value I'm going to put in for the first one is 1. We're going to say first name is Joe R. Smith. 2, Sam M. Jones. He's not going to come up in the query. And you know what? Oh, see the go buttons? The go button actually throws it in there. Let's go back in and look. So now we have 2 records, right?
Yeah.
Let's insert one more. So I'm going to go back to the all right. It's being a little cumbersome, but I want to insert one more because I'm going to put 2 Smiths in there on purpose.
Right.
That's kind of my point. So the next value is 3. This person's got a weird
So
name.
it shows you both the values.
And I'm taking shortcuts now. All right. And there it is inserted in. Let's go take a look at the information and make sure it's there. There it is.
Yep. Control S.
All right. So now let's go back to the program one more time. And
It's back to student.
yep.
Okay.
I changed this back to student. We're still querying for Smith.
Yep.
We created all of these fields in the table. Now we're going to run it.
Oh,
Oh, I'm still getting the error.
really?
Yeah. Okay. So you're not getting the error, so it must be...
And I'm connecting to your database right now because I do it for mine.
Okay, so let me just check my connection then. So apollo.gtc.edu, Java book, that's my username, that's my password. The problem is I'm not getting the console to really see the error.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to close Eclipse, and this is kind of a radical step, frankly. But you know, sometimes you take radical steps to solve problems. And then I'm going to relaunch it. And if this is as far as we get tonight, well, this is as far as we get tonight, and then next week we'll have to fix it because we are past. It might, yeah, it might count as the first exercise. Honestly, you're right. And I have some thoughts as to what the problem is too, now that I'm thinking about it.
The driver?
Yeah, I'm thinking the driver is the problem in terms of the fact that it's got space in the file name.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna actually.
Isn't that the same Java you wrote
It is. Let me see if I can find a way to delete. I can't delete it from here. All right, so I'm going to go back to the project folder.
It's like copies. Oh, click
Yeah, I got to click out of there.
on yeah.
There we go. So I'm going to remove that. I'm going to correct the file name. I'm thinking it just doesn't like that. So I'm going to remove it. Apply. Okay. I'm going to go back and change the file name. It's on my desktop somewhere. You guys see it? I don't see it. All right, I'm going to do it through a file window. Oh, it's in my downloads folder. Right. All right, let's rename that. I think
Yeah.
that.
Oh, you know what? It's the one.
It's the one. It's
Yeah,
got
It's
it-
the parentheses. That
Yeah, that is what's messing it up. So I'm getting rid of that. Oh, because I already have
Pull to
that
your
file
desktop,
in
Pull
there.
to your desktop and then rename it from your desktop.
yeah.
Good plan. Although it just tells me that it's already in the folder. So,
The same thing.
yeah. All right. So not a big deal. Let's back to Eclipse. Let's try to reconnect it.
Project properties.
All right. Libraries, external, on the desktop. There it is. Open. Apply. Okay.
Run.
All right. Crossing fingers. Yay! Now you notice what happened in the console.
Is it
I do have the
names?
query results.
Because you're
outputting
asking
in
for
the
Smith, but
console.
There's two of them.
Yeah, there's two Smiths in the
If you were to
table.
change where MI equals R, you just see Joe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is working. So for as primitive as this is, you guys, this is actually the first exercise for the chapter. That's the first exercise. But this is a necessary first step to do the rest of the work. So if we can't get this stuff to work, you're not going to get any of the rest of the stuff to work. So once we have this stuff working, our next step is this: building a GUI interface to display the data, and then allow us to do more advanced database operations where we can create buttons that allow us to
Connect to
update
different
the
databases.
information or delete the information or insert new records, all your typical database stuff. So this is a necessary first step. I'm glad you guys stuck it out with me. So I'll see you all next week.
A lot of steps.
It is, and that's why it takes a couple of weeks. It is a lot of
Right.
steps. All right, I'll see you all next week. The video ends here.